Now, I don't usually do adverts on here, but I want to talk about a Kickstarter that's coming up that is going to be legendary, and that is the Kickstarter for Snowdonia 3rd edition, which is starting on July the 3rd. Now, I've spoken to Tony about this, and people are very excited. This is going to be a legendary Kickstarter. It's going to have a bigger board, it's going to have deluxe pieces, it's going to have all new art, but it's still going to be the same great, tight, whimsical worker placement game. On top of that, you'll be able to pledge for everything Tony has done for this game, which is absolutely gigantic because Tony is nothing if not prolific. So July the 3rd, Kickstarter, Snowdonia 3rd edition. But if you're not swayed by me, then listen to someone who really knows what they're talking about.
Hi, my name's Arthur Boydell, and I want you to sponsor my dad's game on Kickstarter. There's loads of stuff. Dad, you've got to pay me a $5, alright?
Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week is a doctor with a focus on children. In his professional life, he works as a developmental paediatrician dealing with children with ADHD, autism and other developmental problems. He's also both the health promotion officer and the mental health officer for the Royal College of Paediatricians, and is writing the organisation's recommendations on children and screen time. As a gamer, he has guested on the Dice Tower podcast with his section Bringing Up the Meeples, and has a YouTube channel, Games for Families, talking about the joys and frustrations of playing games with your children. My guest this week is Max Davie. Max, welcome.
Hello, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be on a podcast I've listened a few times, and I'm very excited to be here.
Fantastic. You're one of the 5 listeners then.
No, well, one of the pioneer, I think I'd like to think of myself.
So how difficult was it for you to choose the games to take to the cabin?
I realised early on that it was an impossible thing to get right, and intermittently since I sent you the list, I've kind of been poised over the keyboard saying, no, I didn't mean that one, I meant this one. But I've decided not to do that because that's a never-ending road to purgatory. So I'm going to stick with my first ones that didn't take me very long but are probably very wrong.
And what criteria did you use for choosing the games?
I think I looked at games that I sort of saw myself. Hopefully the apocalypse would come at the weekend. So, I mean, most of them do. And I would be with my family and we'd be running to a shack near where I live with at least some of our family intact. And so I'd be thinking about the games I would like to play with those people if we were stuck somewhere for a long period of time.
So purely utilitarian and practical rather than sentimental?
I think there's some sentiment in there, and I think that will become clear as we talk. I think there's some things that will remind me of happier times.
So I want to start by, this may seem a strange question, but the first question I've written down here in my notes is, why become a doctor? And the reason I ask that is because I've known a few doctors in my life, and when I speak to them about their job, it seems sort of endlessly difficult and tiring and frustrating and saddening. And so I kind of wonder how people have the stomach to do this for an entire life. So I guess, my question is, why become a doctor?
I think the honest answer is I blundered into medical school on the basis of basically having spent my adolescence reading comics, and Battle Action Force was my favourite. And it struck me at the time that all these soldiers and, amazing kind of super secret agents, that the doctor, the medic, was kind of cool because he didn't really he had a little pistol, but he wasn't big or strong, but everyone respected him and sort of thought he was a good guy and kind of was grateful for his presence. And I thought, well, I'm never going to be the biggest or the strongest, but I could do that, and that would be cool. So I actually started in medical school wanting ultimately to join the army, but I was quickly cured of that by any sort of contact with the military regime, which does not suit me at all. And so once I was in there, I sort of stayed, and I found I really enjoyed it. I am able to absorb the trauma and stuff and move on from it in a way that is probably not psychologically that healthy for me, but allows me to cope with the kind of the more grisly bits of it.
So it's always said that teachers bring up teachers and doctors bring up doctors. Is the medical profession in your family?
Not at all. My mother's family, as far as I can make out, are a bunch of chancers, kind of going back for generations of hoodwinkers, and she won't thank me, but they just seem to be basically kind of all sorts of different business schemes. And my dad, basically either stockbrokers or farmers. So no, not at all. No medics at all.
So how did you find going into medical school? Was it everything you thought it would be? Was it easier? Was it more challenging, more difficult?
I think I was too stupid and too arrogant as a young man to sort of really take in how what a big thing it was. I just went in, I discovered that there was alcohol and members of the opposite sex, and that was fun. And I kind of, the lectures kind of washed over me. I kind of took them in factually, but I never really absorbed the importance of it until I got to clinical work. And I was like, okay, this is really important, and there were real people involved. But I was too young and stupid when I first arrived.
So is there, when studying medicine, a disconnect from the job you will eventually be doing?
There is I went to Cambridge, which is a very traditional course, which is essentially doing a science degree for 3 years, and then you actually start your training. So by the time I started my training, I knew a bit about medicine, and I was a bit older and a bit less of an idiot, although not much. And so I think, when you started going onto the wards, then it did start to hit you a bit, that you had to kind of behave and treat people nicely and well.
So I have a question. So when I was at university, my drama school was very close to the medical school at the university. And one day we were walking past this building, and this friend of mine tapped me on the shoulder and this grisly smile on his face and said, "Do you know what that is there?" And I said, "No." And he said, "That's the place where the doctors chop up the dead bodies." And it's always sort of filled me with this sense of existential dread. So if you don't mind me asking a slightly fatuous question, how is it to cut up your first cadaver?
Again, when you do it, you're all doing it together. You're doing it in a group of about four of us on our table, and we have this gentleman in front of us, and it was very much not that the lecturers were trying to dehumanize him, but it was very much done in this very matter-of-fact way. And in fact, at the beginning, it was kind of, this is kind of, scary and a bit gross. And then you kind of got used to it, and you just got fascinated by the anatomy that you were discovering as you kind of literally peeled back the layers of the structure of this man's body. There was one moment when we were all queuing up to we had to saw the head in half. We'd done the external anatomy of the head, but then we had to get it sawn in half. And looking back, there was really no reason why they couldn't have done that in between sessions, but they made us queue up to do it. And I wonder if they were doing that mainly to freak us out. But by the end, we'd kind of come full circle, and we really, we found out the guy. I don't know if we ever found out the guy's name, but we named him, not in a jokey way, but we named him, and we kind of thought about his life a little bit at the end, once we'd got over the sort of visceral stuff. And actually, in the end, it was a really amazing experience. And I certainly didn't see anything that was disrespectful from anyone when we were doing it.
So you chose to specialise in paediatrics. Why did you go into this arena?
Well, I when I did my placement in paediatrics, it did strike me how much better it smelt than the adult wards, which are not very nice smelling. I think also, you go around on a ward round, of a paediatric ward round, and a little 3-year-old would stand up in bed and go, "I'm better." And I think, when I was telling people I want to do pediatrics, that's the reason I gave. And my friends were like, that's fine, Max, but you were always going to do pediatrics because you're essentially a child. So, so there's whatever the kind of version you believe, it seemed to have been my destiny to end up in some part of peds.
But is there an attendant danger with paediatrics? Because I guess part of being a doctor is seeing people die. And, when that's a child, is it more affecting? Is there a greater sense of injustice? Or is it part of being a professional just to be able to take these things on the chin and take them with equanimity?
I mean, in most paediatric specialties, they don't die very often. Those that do die, they're usually expected. And so, quite honestly, the expected deaths, the very, very premature babies who have died, the children with intractable and incurable disease, they do stay with you, and you think about them and you remember them, what their families were like and the stories, but they don't cause a raw wound in you. It's the unexpected deaths, the ones where you wonder whether you could have done better. Those are the ones that I think all of us I don't know about everyone in medicine, but so many people in medicine pick at their memories of that, and it is painful. I can think of at least 2 children where I still, at least 10 years later, I still find myself thinking about them, and it is it's the ones I wasn't expecting to die that it absolutely hits you like a hammer.
I'm always fascinated by this, and then when I had Dan Hughes on the program, I asked him the same question, sort of, how do you separate this from your life? And I guess, for you, how do you, because you're dealing with sick children, how do you separate that from the rest of your life? I
think you have to have a particular set of mind that you can leave things behind when you leave the room. I think it's partly it's just my temperament, that when I leave a room, I leave what I was in the room behind. And sometimes that's deeply irritating because I don't remember things that have happened. But actually, it's an asset in medicine that you can move on to the next thing without the previous thing hanging over you too much. And I think there's other people who burn out in medicine are often the ones who can't do that.
So when did gaming come into your life, and did this accompany you through your medical studies?
No, not at all. That was a period when I was playing no games. I was drinking and I was having fun, and then actually we got sort of settled down, got married, and I still wasn't really playing games. I had been a sort of games workshop owner of games in my adolescence, so I had all the kind of old Games Workshop stuff, but I didn't play them very much. I was mainly just painting and looking at them and kind of just enjoying how nice they are to look at. But then and now they weren't very good games, so I didn't really get into actual play. I really discovered games as a way of playing with my children when they had got. Well, it was almost a sort of play I could have with my children that I also enjoyed. I like a bit of physical rough and tumble, and I like running around outside, but I'm not somebody who enjoys hours and hours in the Wendy house pretending to have a tea party. I like to do something a bit more cerebral, and fortunately the kids were also into it. So I really came as a father into gaming.
So your first game is hugely popular, and this is Cosmic Encounter. Why are you taking this to the cabin?
Well, I've put the 5 games roughly in the order of which I encountered them as a gamer. So Cosmic Encounter was the game that really... I'd played games before that I'd enjoyed. I'd played Ticket to Ride and Ingenious, and I thought, the gaming, that's quite fun. And we went to the local games cafe, Thirsty Meeples, with some mates. And we played this game, and it looked great, but we couldn't work out. It took us ages to work it out. And it was just this moment when I realised, oh my God, this game is completely insane. It's totally wonky and it doesn't make any sense. And all these crazy things are happening. And the first game that made me laugh out loud at the stuff that was going on. And at that point, I was hooked. I know it is not the greatest game in the world, and I know that a lot of people justifiably don't like it. My wife would be furious if this was one of the only 5 games I took to an actual cabin in the woods, because she won't play it. But it's so much fun if you approach it in the right way, and with any luck, My friend Paddy would make it to the woods with us, who does the games for families channel with me, and it's also his favourite game, so we could play to our heart's content.
Now, I've played Cosmic Encounter 5 times, and I've never enjoyed it, and yet everyone says it's absolutely fantastic. What am I missing? What am I doing wrong? I think,
objectively, it's a wonky, unbalanced, stupid system, and if that bothers you, then you're not going to like it. But it doesn't bother me, because for me it's about the ride. I don't go in caring a damn if I win or not. I want to see cool things done and do cool things myself, and that's what I want from a Cosmic Encounter. If I come last, but I've pulled off some really amazing stuff, and some amazing stuff has happened, I'm perfectly happy. So I don't know if that's a factor, but I really don't want. I think it's wrong to correct anyone for not liking a game anyway. But I think in this one, it is particularly wrong, because objectively, it is not in any way the greatest game ever made. It is just stupid. But that's what I love.
So moving on then, you deal with developmental issues with children. What pushed you into this area of paediatrics?
Well, I've been working in hospitals for a while, and I was feeling a bit constrained. The hospital is quite a hierarchical place to work. It's quite restrictive. You're really in a very few rooms doing kind of the same thing over and over. And suddenly I was in the community. I was working. I was going to schools. I was going to people's houses. I was kind of talking to people for longer periods of time and finding out not just about what was wrong with them, but about their life. It felt to me, rather than reading a magazine article about something, to read a book, to really dig into what was going on behind the scenes. And I got hooked by autism to start with, and how fascinating it is as a way of being, as a way of the brain can work in this autistic way. And then later I became very interested, because I had a brilliant mentor when I was training. I got very interested in ADHD, because that was really his passion, and he sort of passed it on to me. So those are the two big things. And then I moved back to Lambeth, and where I'd done a bit of training before, and Lambeth is just an incredible place to practice, and the ADHD here is turned up to 11, and the autism is terribly complicated, and it's just a ride every day to kind of deal with what happens in this borough.
So we hear the term ADHD a lot, and I remember, as long as I can remember, hyperactive has been a descriptor for a particular kind of person, but what actually is it? What are its origins, and why does it affect children in such a way? It's actually been described about 100 years ago, and if you look back through, actually, I know that you're in Germany, so there's the German Peter has Fidgety Phil as one of the first descriptions in literature of ADHD, essentially. So it's been around for a long time. I think it manifests in children because children are more hyperactive, and ADHD in adults is quite a different thing. It's more about organisation. It's more about emotional regulation. It's not about bouncing off the walls, because of the adult psychology is different. But so I think that's why the hyperactivity of ADHD is particularly prominent in childhood. Adult ADHD is still quite massively underdiagnosed, and we can argue that back and forth if you want. but in children we are still catching up, I think, with a century of underdiagnosis. So when we think of childhood, we think of sort of unconstrained joy, the wonderful joy of discovery and things like this. But what kind of mental illnesses can affect children, and when do they manifest themselves? Is there a particular time when these things happen?
Well, you have to bear in mind that I do a 2-hour workshop on this on a regular basis, so I'll try and keep it as short as possible. Yes, I mean, they do. About 1 in 10 children and young people at any one time have a diagnosable mental health problem. These are generally split into externalizing, which is kind of behavioral problems, ADHD, and then internalizing problems such as anxiety, depression, and so forth. And then in the background, there's things like autism and a few other things. As to why, it's usually a mixture of things. In a number of cases of different conditions, genetics is extremely important, but in almost everywhere there is a part to play in people's early relationships and their ongoing relationships, and how those relationships condition their internal working models of and their assumptions and how they respond to situations. And so those things in turn, sort of, how someone's early relationships happen is conditioned in turn by their social milieu, and the presence or absence of domestic violence, drinking, and above everything else, poverty is the big driver of mental health problems in the UK. There's no question about it.
And so you said there's a genetic component. And so do we see a point in the future where you can genetically screen for certain conditions and, you can take this course of treatment or this course of treatment and you can basically weed out any sort of mental health issues? Or is that just fancy?
It's not fanciful. There's two questions. One is whether it's feasible to be able to do accurate risk factoring on the basis of a genetic test at birth. I think it probably will be in a few years' time. And the other, of course, is whether it's ethically desirable. And that's a whole different question. I think that the current state of play of the science, and I read an editorial about this very morning, is that the genetics of all these different particularly of the neurodevelopmental conditions like the ones that I would deal with, the genetics overlap. So what you would probably get is your child is at increased risk of these difficulties rather than a specific condition. And here are some things that would allow you to decrease the risk of these becoming problematic, because in all of these things. So let's say, for example, ADHD. There's the bit that genetic is how fizzy your brain is. How we all know people who are quite fizzy. I am one myself, who kind of full of energy, lots of movement, find it hard to keep still, forgetful, all those sorts of things. That's part of ADHD. The other part is how well they function. So for me, the aim of any kind of preventative strategy would be, okay, you're fizzy. Let's, from a very early age, make sure that your fizziness is something that's celebrated, something that is accommodated, and something that you learn to deal with over time, rather than being discovered at the age of 10 as a massive problem and by which time things have gone wrong. Does that make sense? I think you sort of you establish what sort of a neurophysiology this person's likely to have, and then you say, okay, so these are the sorts of things that will make them not different, not change them, but make their life easier growing up. I think that would be a wonderful future. I think there are a number of other possible futures which are a little bit more dystopic.
Have you seen a change over the time that you've been a doctor? So, for instance, is there more restraint in the prescription of drugs for children?
I think that the use of drugs for mental health conditions is probably slowly increasing in the UK. It's increasing much slower than, for instance, in the US, where I think that in many senses it's gone a little bit out of control. Actually, specifically for ADHD, after an increase a few years ago, the rates are pretty flat. And I think essentially in the UK we are, and in Europe as a whole, I think what happens is that a kind of way of treating is established, and once that's established, there isn't this runaway inflation of prescribing drugs that you see in the US because of the way that different health services are organised. So I think at the moment things seem fairly flat in terms of prescription, and I think that's right. I don't think we should be rushing to do loads, but I don't think we should be abolishing medication because it's very valuable for some children.
Is it lazy received wisdom to presume that the prescribing of drugs to anybody is a bad thing?
Yes. I think it can be very lazy practice to just prescribe drugs as soon as you find a problem. It's easy for the doctor, it's easy for the parents, and it removes the problem and places it in a pill. But I think that if you have done everything you can to alter the environment, to alter the relationships, to try and work on these internal working models in the child, and you're still having problems and you haven't got any alternatives, I think you have to consider it. You don't have to go for it, and I completely respect and support people who make the choice not to use medication, and we try everything we can to support them. But if people go for it, I think it is wrong to condemn them equally.
So your next game is one that I would take to the cabin, so it's obviously a brilliant choice. It might be one of the simplest games on your list, but I think it's also one of the deepest and rewarding and offers you an incredible amount. This game is Skull. So why is this game so good?
Well, you start off thinking, what is this game? This is not a game. This is just some beer mats. And then you go, oh, okay, no, there is a game here. It's like a guessing game. And then you go, oh, underneath that guessing game, there's a bluffing game, and then you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and it is basically manages to achieve this with essentially some beer mats with some pictures on, and that is genius. I mean, that is the epitome of elegance in games. It's a game that we will always bring out wherever we are. You know, if we're in the cabin and we've got no table space, we can still play Skull, and we can play it with kids. I mean, they're rubbish at it usually, but you can play it with them. And you know, they enjoy the flipping and the kind of, you know, occasionally they'll get something right, and it's just perfect fun, and I think everyone should have one.
And do you think a game that promotes what is essentially deception is a good choice for the febrile atmosphere of an apocalyptic cabin?
Oh, I see. Particularly in the cabin. Well, I think you need a magic circle, don't you? I think, you know, tempers will be running high. There'll be high stress, and channeling some of that stress into competition within the magic circle of gaming is going to be very helpful. It's going to be, you know, and it's also a way of getting to know people who's good at deception and dissembling. And for the children, you know, who knows what they're going to have to do when they go out there into the big wide world fighting the aliens or the radiation or whatever it is that's caused this. So, you know, they're going to need to learn how to lie and how to, you know, get the best deal for the colony. So
I want to talk about children and gaming. So why is gaming good for children?
Gaming is great for children because it's a space for them to interact in a supportive and controlled environment, particularly if they're gaming not just with other children but also with adults. I do think it almost always works best for an adult to at least be around when children are playing board games, particularly of any kind of competition or complexity. And because I think it's a really good space to get to know each other and to get to know how each other responds in different situations, such as losing, being stuck, having to cooperate. All of those things can be simulated within games. And in terms of, I mean, people do talk about the specific developmental advantages of board games. I think you have to be a little bit careful. The experimental data is a bit lacking, but we do have good data. We do have good data for various therapies and good, you know, evidence for various therapies that look a lot like games. And so it's not implausible that a game that, say, Lego therapy is one example, which is essentially a game, and has been, I can't remember the name of the game, but it's essentially one person says what pieces are needed, another person supplies them, and then the third person builds, and then you swap. It is a game, and anything which has kind of got that cooperative element is going to have similar aspects. So I think it's very likely that there are developmental benefits for games, but I would say you're not going to benefit from a game developmentally or otherwise if you don't enjoy it. So don't play games if you don't find them fun. So I would never prescribe a game. You have to be enjoying yourself to get anything out of it.
I think things like the magic circle, learning how to lose, how to compete fairly are good lessons for children to take into adulthood.
I think they're good lessons for all of us to learn and to take into our life. Yes, I think that's right. I think the idea of... So I think a little bit about children either on the autistic spectrum or with, what people might call autistic traits. You know, they really struggle with these unwritten rules of life. They really struggle with deception and how when people say things they don't mean and you know, uncertainty of any kind. And games are a really good way of gently introducing them into this kind of thing, again, in a way where they're supported, where the stakes are low, where the people around them love them and, you know, and will support them and will help them if they get upset or distressed. And I think that can be a really good place for them to start to sort of build these skills. Although getting them engaged in anything which is not quite abstract can be quite tricky.
So you said one of the impetuses for you getting into gaming was gaming with children. How has that helped you as a parent?
I think it's taught me skills in being patient, in being supportive. I do have a quick temper, and I think it's been a good proving ground for me to deal with the children being irritating and or oppositional in a way that's calmer than I have been. So I think it has been an asset to me in being a better parent, to have these experiences with my kids.
So I'm sure that a lot of gamers see gaming not just as recreation, but also as a mental workout that we, stave off the sort of mental degeneration that happens in old age. To what degree do you think this idea holds water?
Well, I think that the main benefit of gaming, if you're thinking about staving off aging, is actually social contact. I think there's much better evidence that social contact is helpful than any particular brain training. So, people say, doing a crossword will stop Alzheimer's, doing brain training on your phone will stop Alzheimer's. None of that is true. And in fact, the evidence for brain training specifically is really poor. I do think that I'm really looking forward to being old and a gamer and being able to go and play games, because the idea of having a hobby that I will still be able to do when I'm 85 is brilliant for me. I think it's great that I can continue to do this, however decrepit I become.
So, there's this idea that if you jog, it promotes heart health, and if you...
So there was a specific thing about gaming and mental gymnastics. Yes, exercise will prolong your life.
What I was talking about was this idea that you're doing sort of mental gymnastics, mental exercise, and that'll help keep your brain healthier in the future.
I'm yet to see conclusive proof on that. That's a very scientific answer. I'm sorry. I can lapse into that kind of skeptical mode at times.
No, it's fantastic. You're lending an air of scientific respectability to the show.
Absolutely. Yes, well, quite.
So your next game is a game that is a reskin of a game that was very popular last year. This is Secret Voldemort. So why are you taking Secret Voldemort with you?
Because it's my favourite social deduction game, and I think social deduction games are brilliant for people who aren't particularly gamers. There will be people in the cabin who are not gamers. There'll be people who fondly remember when we had televisions and we were all able to watch the Harry Potter movies. And we may even have some of the original text in the cabin if someone's brought one. So I suspect, in a post-apocalyptic world, Harry Potter will be the British foundation myth. I think it's a great social deduction game. It's really accessible for kids and families. My favourite single gaming moment of 2017 was playing this in a field on a campsite with some kids I'd never really met before. Some of them I had, some of them I hadn't, at a wedding, and everyone was hungover. All the adults were hungover on a Sunday morning, and the kids were bored. So I played round after round of Secret Voldemort, and it was just brilliant.
So why do you prefer the reskin to the original theme?
Well, I mean, obviously there was some discussion about Secret Hitler. I can see why people either find it offensive or bitingly and brilliantly satirical. I don't find it either, but I know that there are people in my gaming group and in my family who would not play a game where you were a fascist. So there wasn't any question of me buying it.
So I know the guy who did the reskin, so I should pull back on my slating of it to some degree, but I'm one of the people who think Secret Hitler is a wonderfully biting piece of satire. Do you think reskinning it, changing the theme, robs it of its satirical heft? Or if you don't believe it's satirical, it's not an issue?
Exactly. It's of course, Secret Voldemort is not in any way satirical, but for me, satire lifts the lid on power and shows the ridiculousness and humanity beneath. And I'm not sure how Secret Hitler does that, but maybe you can explain.
I guess it's the notion that people out of good intentions will do things that are against their own interests. So, if you're a liberal, you might be encouraged to vote in fascist policies because that will give you the power to be able to overthrow the fascists. But actually, by death of 1,000 cuts, essentially what you're doing is opening the door to fascism.
Okay, that is a really good reading of the game that had not occurred to me. So, yeah, I can absolutely get behind that. And yeah, I would play it, but I can't play it with my family. So I look forward to playing it sometime with you.
And so you said this is your favourite social deduction game. Why? What does it do that other social deduction games don't?
It's really hard to express, isn't it? I think it just has that real balance between there being lots of interesting decisions and it becoming too fiddly. I think they've just got that balance right. That you're constantly making decisions, even if you're not directly involved, and yet the teaching is easy and everything flows very nicely. It's one of those kind of intangible things about what turns from a good to a great game. I suppose I'm not a very good game reviewer. I find it hard to express that in words.
I mean, my biggest problem I found with Secret Hitler is that it's very difficult for the fascists to win. Have you found this to be an issue in the game?
I have, but most of my plays of it have been with children who have been delighted that the Death Eaters have been beaten, even those who were Death Eaters themselves. So it hasn't been a major problem for people's enjoyment of the game. Most of my gaming is with people where my main objective in playing is for them to have a good time. So it doesn't bother me if there's wonky things like that, as long as people are enjoying themselves. So I suppose I have a particular sort of perspective on that.
So your latest preoccupation is children and screen time. And there seems to be a correlation between too much screen time and depression in children. But what is true and what is scaremongering? What is
true is that watching any kind of screen for 5 hours a night on a school night is a bad thing. But that's not necessarily true because of the screens. You can actually play quite a lot of video games or watch or be on your phone for quite a long time before there is a measurable effect, negative effect on your well-being. In fact, people who use some screens appear to have a better well-being than people who use no screens at all. Although I don't know how they found anyone in these surveys who use no screens at all. But apparently they do exist. So I think excessive screen use is excessive because it prevents you from doing the things that you want to do in your life or that your family want you to do in your life. So my view on this is always that if you have a depressed adolescent who is playing Fortnite or Call of Duty until the small hours, the Fortnite or Call of Duty is not the thing that is making them depressed. They are seeking solace in these things from whatever else is bothering them. So I think people are getting it the wrong way around and choosing what is quite an easy scapegoat for sort of our modern malaise.
Can we exacerbate what's already there?
I think people can get into vicious cycles, and then one of the main reasons that this happens is sleep. So if you are withdrawing from your family life for whatever reason into your room and playing video games until the small hours, then your sleep will deteriorate, and therefore your mental health will deteriorate. We know that sleep is necessary for mental health, and that's one way you can get into a predicament. And of course, there's also this vexed issue of social media, where I have to say there are definite vulnerabilities. If you're already vulnerable and you're already feeling low and feeling like particularly sensitive to rejection, there's a whole lot of rejection to be had in social media. So I think it is that group where you do have a genuine concern about social media worsening existing vulnerabilities.
So people like to think in black and white terms, and they say things like smartphones are bad. But what are the advantages to children having access to these kinds of technologies?
Well, I think it opens a whole world, doesn't it? I mean, the world is so incredibly open to children at the moment. My kids will be able to look up pictures of children's lives in Paraguay or the breeding life of gannets just in a second, and they'll be able to find out all about it. It's incredible. So I think we can't lose that because it's amazing. And I think also real life is not this kind of perfect thing that sometimes it's presented as an alternative to the internet. People feel rejected by the people who are physically around them, and they can find places where they are accepted online. People with Asperger's, people who are transsexual, or both, can find solace in online communities, and we mustn't take that away either.
So you're writing the recommendation for the Royal College of Paediatrics. So firstly, what is the purpose of this project?
Well, I'm writing it with a number of other people. I'm not sort of sitting in the room myself. The idea is to give families the information that they need to ask themselves the right questions about their children's screen time. It's not... there's stuff in the media just today about, should we have a 2-hour cutoff and then we should stop everyone being on screens? There's no evidence for that, and it's not going to be practical. We need to give people, good quality evidence about what is true, what isn't true, what the myths are, and what the questions they ought to ask themselves. So the sorts of things I've been talking about. And in fact, this is a 5 Games for Doomsday exclusive, because we haven't talked to the media about it. But that's the shape of what we're going to be saying is, is your child's screen time interfering with your family life? Is it interfering with their sleep? And above all, are you in control of your child's screen time? Because if you're not in control, then all sorts of risks can result.
So what kind of advice would you give to parents who are concerned about the issues?
I think I just ask them those questions. Are you in control? No. Okay, well, how are you going to get control? How are you going to negotiate something sensible with your young person and stick to it? And if it's a younger child, of course, you're going to be using, quite firm boundaries and potentially sanctions if they won't stick with your boundaries. With a adolescent, you'll need to be negotiating. What is appropriate? When are you going to go to bed? What social networks are you on? Do you understand what the dangers are? So it depends on the age, but I think people just need to treat this as like going out into the town square on your own. You wouldn't let a 5-year-old do it. You would let a 14-year-old do it, but you would tell them the dangers. You'd tell them what's out there and make sure they know how to protect themselves.
So your next game is Downforce. So this is an old game that's been repackaged. So as a general question, is this repackaging and reselling these old games, is that valuable for gaming, or is this just pure cynical nostalgia making money off our desire for things in the past?
Well, I'd never played Downforce in any of its versions and never heard of it until Restoration Games came up with it. And I think it's reached an awful lot more people through Restoration than it would have done just with the few copies that were flying around. I believe that the revamped version is better and slicker and plays more elegantly than the previous version. And, if you look at the current buzz, it's about Fireball Island, which is, superficially the same game, but it bears no mechanical resemblance to the old game. So I don't think it's pure nostalgia. I think it's using nostalgia and that kind of retro styling as a way to make modern games accessible to a wider public. I'm all for it. I like how they're going about things.
So what is it about Downforce that makes it a Doomsday game?
Well, I wanted a gateway game. I wanted a game that is recognisably a board game that is accessible to all the people who are non-gamers who are in the cabin with us. It's a game that plays quite a number of people, but equally plays very well with a low number of people. The scale is excellent. It's visually very appealing. It's got a little bit of toy appeal, and I can teach it in 2 minutes. And actually, it's one of the games that young boys particularly, and young girls, but I have a group of young boys in my gaming group at my kids' school who will play this themselves without me having any input, and that's quite valuable to me.
And do they play it correctly, or do they make up new rules?
I sometimes go on and say, what's going on? And they're like, oh, we've got our own version. And I'm fine with that. I think as long as they're all enjoying themselves and there's no one in the corner going, you're doing it wrong. As long as it's consensual, yeah, it's got that ability because you can do different things with it, and that's fine.
So when would you play it in the cabin?
I would play it on celebration days. I think it's a celebratory game. I think it's a bright and fun and lots of shouting and lots of winning, and it's not a tense experience. It's very breezy. So I would play it on people's birthdays.
So if you haven't got enough to do with being a paediatrician, you decided to go into board game media. Why did you go into this area?
I don't know. I haven't got time for it, and I still don't know why I'm doing it. I think originally I thought I had something to say, and I sort of still sometimes think that I do. So the reason for bringing out the meeples is that people had, in passing on a number of occasions, I'd heard people talk about, the benefits of this and the benefits of that, and this is really good for this thing for children. And some of the stuff was fine, and I was thinking, well, actually there is a market. I do know about this stuff, and I think people might be interested in knowing about it. So I did that for a bit, and that sort of ran its course. And then I thought, well, Paddy, my friend, my partner in Games for Families, was always joking that he wants to be a YouTube superstar, and I was like, well, let's do it then, because I really want to reach families who are kind of curious, about the game scene. In Germany, it's a very established family thing, but in Britain, we're at the point where it's appearing on the media regularly. People are becoming more aware of it, but people may not know where to start and how to get into the hobby. So that was part of what Games for Families was about originally. But then also, I'm recently thinking I should revisit some of the stuff that I've been talking about tonight, about helping games being useful for kids with autism, kids with attention problems, kids with, problems with dexterity. Just as a sort of revisiting of some of those themes. I don't have a plan, but I'm just sort of seeing where it leads.
Do you find that doing the job that you do, you're constantly bombarded with these sorts of questions in your free time? People asking you how they should bring up their children and things like that.
No, because I usually play with people who know me well enough that I won't give them good advice, or I won't. No, basically I think my friends know that I'm not particularly interested in telling them how to bring up their children. I will occasionally, if there's a specific query, give them some pointers, but no, they generally leave me alone.
And so what challenges does board game media present as opposed to being a doctor?
I think one of the things that drew me to it is that I'm kind of established in medicine now, and people know who I am, and they listen to me because of my job title or my experience. And I'm attracted to the idea that nobody knows who I am, and I have to stand on my own merits, and people will listen to me or not listen to me depending on how interesting I am or how well done the video or funny the video I've done is. And I think that's a really nice leveler. I think it's good that I'm competing against people who don't have medical degrees or whatever, for people's attention, and it's humbling, and I like that. I like the fact that I'm nobody in a sense.
And what do you see for your channel in 5 years? And do you see yourself, writing a great popular science book about gaming in the future?
I don't think the channel will exist in 5 years, if I'm completely honest. I think by 5 years' time, I will have an 18-year-old, which is a terrifying thought. My son, so I'll probably be cowering and terrified of the fact that he might have a driving license at that point. I don't know, honestly. There may be a book in me, there may not. I'm sorry to be vague, but I just want to. I'm a bit like Dan in this way, and Dan has been a great help to me in kind of giving me advice about all this. I will do things if I'm passionate about them, but I don't have a plan, and I will do them the best of my abilities, but I won't be kept to a kind of schedule or a kind of any agenda that I have to get to X followers or be this big by this time, because then it stops being fun. And I do it because it's fun. I enjoy talking to people in the hobby and making stupid videos with my dog. So if it stops being fun, I'll stop doing it.
So your last game, when I saw this on the list, I thought, oh, of course. This is a lovely game. Of course it would be on the list. And this is Near and Far. And do you think the game balances the storytelling with the gameplay?
I do. I don't think it's perfect. I think that the perfect marrying of gameplay and storytelling will probably come from Ryan Lorcat at some point. And he may need to take the plunge and use an app to help him with that. But I think it does it so nicely and in such an atmospheric way that you can gloss over the fact that sometimes it sort of comes in funny ways. I would say I've only played the character quest. I haven't played the full quest yet, but the quality of the writing just shines through so much that you're able to look over any kind of slight disconnect.
So why is it going to the cabin? Is it because of what I suggest, that it's just purely pleasant? And I don't mean that in a disparaging way.
No. I think that's right. It's a competitive game that doesn't feel competitive. It's a storytelling game that washes you away with interesting stories. They're not bland, but they're not shocking or kind of harrowing either. It would be, and it sort of feels like a hopeful game in a funny way. You're all questing together towards this thing, and actually to this, I'm not sure what this thing is yet. And I think I'm just excited to know what's the next page of that. And that just feels like an optimistic game to play in what will be pretty depressing times.
So you're driving to the cabin, you're whizzing down the country lanes, and you drive around a corner and the back door flies open and 4 of the games fly out, go down a ravine and are washed away forever. What game do you hope is sitting on the back seat?
This is really hard, and I've tried to think about this today, but my day has gone off the rails a bit, so I haven't really. I would probably keep Near and Far. I would, because it's so lovely and it's so positive, and I think you've got enough, and part of it is you've got enough components that you can make another game out of it. Whereas Skull, you can make Skull out of whatever you have. That would be my second choice. But I think I would keep Near and Far because it just it comforts me.
So if people want to get in contact with you, how would they do that?
Well, I'm on the Twitter at Games for Families. That's a number 4 in the middle, Families. I'm on YouTube. Basically, it's Games for Families everywhere. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We're all there. And just get in touch.
And one final question, just because you're a doctor. Do they have classes in terrible handwriting at medical school?
No, that's my own personal talent that has been with me since the beginning. I'm a natural.
Max Davie, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And if you want to say something nice about the show, or if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on @5gamesfordoomsday on Twitter. You can send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/5G4D. And if you feel the need, it would really help if you could give me a review on iTunes, just to bolster my incredibly fragile ego. And if I've managed to escape the peas marinated in feculence and the dangling horror, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 Games for Doomsday.